whatnot. But I promised, my family and that they'd see me play again. And my second practice on campus, I got cleared in about mid-October. First practice went great. It was just like a walkthrough period. And then the second practice, I was running an outside zone play, almost identical to the play my senior year where I popped my knee and I re-tore my ACL. And, a lot of things go through your mind at that time, like, am I doing the right thing? I mean, this is my 5th season-ending injury in 6 years. And like, why?
Welcome to the Elev8 podcast. I'm your host and coach, Tyler Johnson. Thank you for tuning in. And whether you've tuned in to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you're in the right place. My guest this episode is a former Division I football player that overcame 7 season-ending injuries during his career. His story of resilience and perseverance is one I admire and one I know he'll continue to share and impact others with as well. Please welcome to the Elev8 podcast, Connor Furu. How are you today, Connor?
Doing great, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you on. I wanted to have you on, share some of your story and some of the things that you're doing now. But I guess to kind of start, just give the listeners a little bit of background of kind of who you are. You eventually were a D1 athlete, and kind of talk about how you got there, and then we'll dive into that.
Yeah. So originally growing up in Olympia, Washington, currently living in Austin, Texas. So, I've kind of been all over, went to school in Iowa. Like, I've kind of been all over the country, but I originally grew up in Olympia, Washington. Started playing sports as a really young kid, but I really gravitated towards football around 7 or 8 years old when my parents ended up splitting up. And at that age, I wasn't capable. I didn't have the tools to really cope with that. And so I was just like looking for any way to release any, pent up frustration and things like that. And to be honest, I was a fairly soft kid. Like, I didn't really have a strong like male role model in my life. And, my coaches like throughout the years slowly became like my dads and things like that. But around the 6th or 7th grade was when I really started to get good at football. And ironically, that's kind of when my injuries started happening. So my 8th grade year, I believe we're about to go through my injuries. And so I might even get messed up. The timeline might get foggy, but my 8th grade, I broke my left tibia, snapped it. And, that was rough, but, I got high school to look forward to. I got plenty of time. My dream was to play college football. And then my freshman year, snapped my other tibia after, a season was going really well, whatnot. Sophomore year, I started on varsity, but I don't think mentally I was really capable of overcoming those injuries. And so I was playing more hesitant and whatnot. And then my junior year, I was an all conference level back. I averaged almost a first down a carry. I made huge leaps and bounds. Then I broke my collarbone right before my playoffs. And so I think that at this point it's 3 season ending injuries in the last 4 years. And so in my mind, I'm like, 3 is the lucky number. Like, we're good from here on out, which unfortunately wasn't the case. I had a great off season going into my senior year, won some MVPs at some camps, started getting recruited by some, larger schools. And then my 4th game of my senior year, having the best game of my life, I ended up tearing my ACL. And so basically all the colleges went out the window. Like, for the most part, they look at my medical history and I was just red flagged, which in my mind at that time, I couldn't blame them. It's like, it's there. And, I was a good football player but the injury prone tag sucks, but, it got placed on me. And I was a really downhill hard runner. And, that was what made me a good football player. And I wasn't going to change that about myself. I'm like, if I'm going to play, I'm going to play my way and the way I play best. And if I get injured with it, I'll be, so be it. But a lot of people ask me, why'd you go through all those injuries? And things I talk about a lot is I have a long line in my family of substance abuse, mental illness, and things like that. And my father told me, countless times I saw my father for, 12 hours every couple weeks. It wasn't I had a really rough relationship with my father, and he told me many times to change my name throughout my life. And I found validation in football. Other people, when strangers were coming up to me saying like how they enjoyed watching me play and things like that, like that's where I put all my worth in at that point, just because that I was getting that external validation from people, and I viewed myself as solely a football player. And so when I got that injury prone tag, and then just college just started dropping me, like my worth just continued going down with it, because I viewed all of 100% of what I was on the field. Yeah. And so,
I was just going to say, I know when we had talked a while back too, I think that is a really interesting dynamic that I think part of what I experienced too, that, like you said, people were saying good game and they don't really know you. And I was like, and I think it's unusual as athletes that even strangers will reinforce an identity of you, even though they don't really know you. Mm-hmm. And it happens a lot. And I think on campuses, like just like your story, you're like, it feels great. Like it was something when I went to the real world, I'm like, where are these people? It was a great day. But talk about kind of, how that kind of just, impacted you and as it played out.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, sometimes we are more judgmental, or we don't take words with as much weight from the people closest to us. Mm-hmm. I think, it's like my mom has to love me. She has to say these things, or, my family has to say these things. And so I really believed that, through everything I was not helping, but, one thing with my dad was he was always seemed to be in a better mood, and he didn't say as mean things. He wasn't, as harsh in ways. And it seemed like he didn't drink when I was around if I had a good game. And I got that in my mind when I was really young. And so I kind of placed that pressure on myself of like, I need to have a good game. And then that external validation, it's just, sometimes we just we seek our worth, and we seek what we want in all the wrong places, and we're going to get more into my story a little bit, but one thing I constantly say is everything I prayed for was not answered, but everything I should have been praying for was. And so, but it took years, and then it's like a moment of clarity with that. But I was just searching for validation and worth in just all the wrong areas. But I think that's a problem a lot of us have, like especially with social media and other aspects like that. It's like where you want the likes from even people you don't know. It could be a fake account, but people buy likes from fake accounts. Like that's a thing.
It's weird.
It's weird. And
like you wouldn't maybe it'll work. Like we should start a business where we'll sell fake high fives. Like we'll just like, hey, I'll sell you fake high fives. Like
so a couple, after someone reached out to me actually on social media after I'd been on a couple podcasts, and were like, hey, I know a way for you to like boost your followers. And I was like, sweet, like, let me hear it. And it was like, you got to pay $100 a month. And I'm like, dude, like I would rather have 1,000 people that are real and actually enjoy the content that I produce than having this fake persona that I'm trying to put on for people.
Yeah.
Because I've been that guy. I was that guy. I tried to find that external validation through all the wrong sources. I'm like, I'm not going back.
Yeah.
So
I like that. I think I've only had one or two people that were like, wanted to know data about my podcast before they made a decision. And I'm always like, if that's going to drive your decision to be a guest, then you're the wrong guest.
Yeah.
That I want to serve through this episodes. But, talk more, we went into college, the injuries weren't quite done. But kind of talk a little bit about, going to play at Drake and kind of how that got started and how you navigated college.
Yeah. So Drake was one of the few schools to stick with me. And I after I tore my ACL my senior year, actually it was September 30th, 2016. I'll never forget the date. Yesterday was the 6th year anniversary. And I promised my mom and I promised my coach, who was like my dad at the time, actually like kind of that same figure now, except now as I got older, we become more friends. I see him every time when I go back home and whatnot. But I promised, my family and that they'd see me play again. And my second practice on campus, I got cleared in about mid-October. First practice went great. It was just like a walkthrough period. And then the second practice, I was running an outside zone play, almost identical to the play my senior year where I popped my knee and I retore my ACL. And, a lot of things go through your mind at that time, like, am I doing the right thing? I mean, this is my 5th season-ending injury in 6 years. And like, where, like why? I remember constantly, I kind of wear my faith on my sleeve. And so I remember, praying and being like, I have no idea why I'm going through this, but just at some point, please show me the purpose behind it. At some point, like I can't see it right now, but that's the thing. Sometimes you can't see it until it's like I have a moment of clarity. And so a lot of struggles and mental health issues came with that. I mean, there was times where I was referred to a psychologist by our coaches and staff on campus because I was like mute for weeks. Cause like I walked around for a couple of weeks where I just wasn't talking because I really feared if I opened my mouth to anyone, I would just, start crying. And there was one time in a meeting where I said something and everyone started clapping and like cheering because they hadn't like heard me talking so long. So yeah, it was some dark times.
So I know when I was, when I had injuries a little bit, I didn't, I think looking back, I didn't always cope probably some of the best ways. I know you kind of talked about, and I think that was something I also did. I just kind of became closed, just kind of shut down people until I could figure out what I needed to go through. But what were maybe some things that were positive that helped you get through those times?
I fell into the group, which I think a lot of people do, but males specifically, and also just athletes specifically. It's like to rub some dirt on it. I can handle it on my own. I was kind of my own man for a while. Like my mom, I was raised by a single mom, but I didn't always show a lot of, or talk about my problems very much because she was stressed out with, raising 2 kids and whatnot. And so I just internalized a lot of stuff, which was awful. Weakness and vulnerability aren't the same thing. But I always viewed like, opening up as a weakness to that point. And so somewhere down the line around after I saw a psychologist that actually didn't end up working out, but it like slowly chipped away with me being able to just open up. I met a few people, made some, closer friends, which honestly, one thing that came out of my injuries is that I went through a lot of tough times, which built a lot of amazing relationships. I mean, we know, the guy who connected us,
shout out Pat.
Shout out Pat, my former, we roomed together when we went on an international trip to China, but there was just so many great guys on the team that I knew I could go to. Even if I didn't go to them, I knew in my mind I could. And so honestly, I started journaling a ton because I was hesitant to go reach out to anyone else, but I found like getting my words on paper and having that internal dialogue with myself and like figuring out what's the root of the emotions I'm feeling right now.
Talk a little bit about that. I know one of my other former guests, she talks about having athletes, write a rut. And I liked that format because I think there's journaling, but a rut was just raw, unfiltered thoughts.
Yeah.
Just throw them out. And I think can you talk a little bit about just kind of what journaling did for you? Because I think there is some therapy to see your words and to see your words on paper. There's gains understanding. Can you talk? Yeah. What was your experience? Do you still journal?
I have it right next to me.
There you go. Yeah.
I actually, whenever I go speak at high schools or colleges, I generally hold it in my hand. I don't look at it, but I know, but something about having the words in my hand that I wrote and like either the things I prepared for it or just knowing it just gives me like some peace to it. But it allowed me to just like getting your thoughts on paper and having that internal dialogue, I don't know why, but it made me feel like I wasn't talking to someone, but I was. I don't even know if that makes sense, but it was a way for me to struggle with a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. And when I didn't think I could go to anyone with stuff, I always knew I could go to myself. And so it was almost like I said, this internal dialogue, but I kind of split my personality into two, where I was like, all right, this, like, I would think through, all right, I'm depressed. And then another part of me would be like, all right, why are you feeling this way? Like, let's break it down. Let's break it down.
It's kind of an emotion and irrational.
Yeah. Like the cartoon angel and devil kind of thing. But it's just like, it was almost just like a conflict between the two. Like, all right, let's work this out. Let's get to the root of it. I think a lot of like very simple questions now are demonized. Like, when a kid, you have kids, don't you?
Yeah.
So, they've probably gone through like a why phase. It's like, well, why is this? Why? Like, the why is such a profound question, and like some of the most simple questions, like, are the questions that have brought me to tears. And like asking those just simple questions to yourself. I remember I was having a really rough day after another injury I had later in college, and that ended a season for me there too. And I was struggling. And one of Pat's, shout out Pat again, one of his best friends and one of my friends, Gavin, he was walking through the locker room, and as I was walking out, we were like the only two in there. And he says, "Hey man, how are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm fine." And then he stopped me and he was like, "No, like, how are you?" Yeah. And I started crying and I ran out. But I wasn't crying because I wasn't upset because I was sad. I was actually it was like joy, because I was like, someone cared about me in that moment. Like, they cared about me more than I cared about myself, But when those questions of like, why am I feeling that way? All right, well, I had an injury. Okay, but why are we handling it the way we are? And it's like, well, I've had a lot of insecurities. I've had worth problems. All right, what's the root of that? Why'd you feel that way? And just breaking it down. Yeah. And it's almost like, I don't know if you make a schedule or something, but just checking off your schedule each day, there's a little bit of like a dopamine hit. You're like, all right, I'm getting stuff done.
Oh yeah.
And then as I answered those why questions, my anxiety started to dissipate. Because I was like, I understood myself better. I understood what I was feeling, and then the process of how I got there. And knowing how you're feeling conceptually was what really started to break down and give me more peace.
I think even like the process you're talking about, and even journaling, I think it does put you more in the present moment.
Yeah.
Right. And you're seeing that you're writing about the future or the past, maybe, but it starts to give you, I think it does create some space between you and those thoughts. And I think sports psychologists talk about it all the time, whether it's name it and frame it, like, and I've had people that, a great friend, he's like, he's got his alter ego and ego, and it's like, that's it helps people perform. And I think, but it does take, and I can tell from our conversations too before, that it does take some self-reflection. It does take that it's work to answer those tough questions and be honest with yourself, because it's the easiest person to lie to is ourselves. Right. Yeah. And so, but I love how you talked about just simple, powerful questions, because I think that's a lot of things when I talk with athletes too. It gives you that, it can give you clarity. It can help you, rationalize something, especially when you're in high emotional environments as college football constantly. So was there you mentioned earlier in the podcast, the way coaches kind of filled some of the void of your father and things. Was there a coach or two that in your journey that especially kind of stuck out, that was always just kind of, I'm glad that one was in my life.
Yeah. So my coach in high school, he was our offensive line coach and also our offensive coordinator. He just came to me at a perfect time. It was my freshman year, which is, middle school freshman year. That's just like a weird time, for everybody, and he just came at a time where I needed a strong, presence in my life. And like I said, I grew up, I was a fairly soft kid, and I'm not afraid to admit that, because I know where I started and where I'm at now. And I believe I had to go through those periods to be the person I am. But I mean, he was a, big guy, former D1 lineman, now, parole officer, very,
Had a presence.
rough around the edges, but also very, very understanding and very caring. Like, you knew if he got on you, it was always from a place of wanting the best for you. And so, I mean, that's why he's one of the first people I see anytime I go home. I talk to him constantly. And then also one of a couple of my coaches, but one in particular in college who got me involved in, who was our OC, but got me involved in a trip to India for some anti-human trafficking work. And he was a former pastor, and he's a OC. He was an OC, and he's actually out of college coaching now, but amazing guy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, those two are the ones that definitely stick out in my mind.
Love it. One of the things I like to pull out on the podcast once in a while is we go back and review a tweet. So one of the tweets I looked on your Twitter that stood out, wanted you to talk about maybe a little bit more, but I think it fits right along with your story. You said, I don't know if it's your words, where you got it, whatever, but it said, everything will be okay in the end if you keep going. If it's not good right now, then it's not the end.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I liked it. It hit home.
Yeah. And so that's not mine. Although I do a ton of writing and I share everything I write, that one I can't take credit for. But I saw it and it just hit home. And so, some things that you see don't resonate, or sometimes, like, I had heard that before, but I just heard it again recently. And for some reason, just it clicked. And I was like, oh man, like I got to share that. But long story short, with my college career, I had another shoulder injury after my knee, and then COVID ended the season, and it was 1,646 days from my last high school game to the first college game. And so on a punt, I was covering a punt in my first college game, wearing 2 shoulder braces, a knee brace. I had like a clubbed hand, like I was like a tin man, but I didn't care. I was happy. But I went down and I covered a punt on the sideline, and then I made a solo tackle, and I get up and I look to the sideline. Everyone's going nuts, not because of the play I made, because it was a pretty fairly straightforward, play, but it was because they knew everything that went into it. And that moment I talked about where I said, I don't know the purpose, when I was praying and saying, I don't know the purpose, but, please show it to me. It took 4.5 years for me to get that. But throughout that whole time, I was like, all right, I know this isn't the end. I know this isn't the end. And, I never knew when it was going to be, but I wasn't going to stop until until I got there, or until I knew in my heart I gave everything to it. Yeah. And so that one just hit me home. I believe it's a good reference or analogy or quote to my story specifically, and one I'll probably share when I'm talking to high school or colleges and stuff. That's a good one.
No, definitely keep sharing that one for sure. I think one of the other questions we always like to ask, if you put you in a time machine and you get to go visit 16-year-old you, I know you're traveling back less than a decade or so, but what advice would you give yourself if you could?
Actually, one of the things I've written and I shared, that I think through that time, that was hard for me because I was still struggling with worth at that time a lot. And if 16-year-old me knew what I was going to have to go through, and I said, hey, this is what you're going to have to go through, I don't know if that kid would have done it. But I believe that you need to understand what you never have, so you're better able to give everything you never received. And I struggle with not having a strong, a father figure really in my life, who constantly in my mind chose substances over his kids. And I knew that, there's good and evil to everything, but I believe you can wield your suffering to yours and everyone around you's benefit. And so I knew that, when I have kids, but like those kids are going to be annoyed by how much I love them and how much I openly, show affection. And I have I have, some nieces now, and, I have a great relationship with them. They got me a Funkle t-shirt for my birthday.
Nice.
And stuff. I'm overly affectionate because I know what it's like not to have that.
Yeah.
And like when I talk to colleges, I say that, I take football out of it. If this right now playing college football is the best time of your life, it's going to be one of the best times, but if it's the best time of your life, that's a sad outcome. You have so much life to live after that. And so if you put everything into football, because it's practicing for more and more disciplines down the line. But like I said, with making a promise to my family, I knew if I didn't fulfill that promise, because that was the biggest promise I'd ever made up to that point in my life, and still is, frankly, that it was going to make it a lot easier to not fulfill promises later on. Because if I claim that it's the biggest promise I ever made, and I know that I didn't give it all I had, like who's to say I'm going to make my kid's basketball game or baseball game or something when I like late for work, or like, I was at work, or like, it's going to make it easier for me to make excuses to why I didn't accomplish something. Yeah. And so really auditing your position in life and knowing this, like, I never had this. I never had a strong father figure. Maybe I didn't have good parents, but if you have an example of what good versions of those things are, you got to soak in as much as you can. So I say too, that I am who I am because of those who came before me, and I'm going to become who I'm capable of becoming for all those who come after, because I understand where I came from. I understand the century worth of pain. My uncle died of kidney failure or liver failure from alcoholism. My grandfather suffered from it. It was over a century worth of stuff. And I know that. But I know because of whatever happened forged, the person I am, and everyone who comes after me is not going to have to deal with that, at least on my behalf, so.
Well, love it. One of the other questions we like to ask is waving a magic wand. And usually we ask, if you could wave a wand, and every student athlete out there would be blessed with some sort of skill or ability or something. But I want to twist it with your experience in injuries. And I think, I've been, in the training room and out for a season and experienced, luckily only once or twice in my years of football. Yeah. But if you could wave a wand, and every student athlete that's going through an injury, seen or unseen, mental or physical, what would you hope for them tomorrow morning?
I think I would hope that they saw the bigger picture. So after I got done playing, I played 3 college games in my college career. I actually thought college coaching was the route I was going to go. I spent a season coaching at Drake, and there was a young kid, freshman, who had never really had injuries, but he'd end up tearing his ACL, and it was the worst thing that had, ever happened to him. One of the worst things, like in his eyes. And I went to talk to him about it because he was really struggling. And I said, I don't want you to take offense to this, but I don't feel bad for you. And because that would mean I'd have sympathy for you. And throughout all my pain that I went through, the worst thing that people did was tell me how sorry they were for me, because it just reiterated the state I was in. It's like, clearly I'm worth the sympathy. Like, people are pitying me for my experience, right? So I said, listen, if I've never seen someone attack an injury, a significant injury, and come out on the other end worse off, like with everything they have. And I'm not even talking about football. I said, I don't feel bad for you, because that would imply I don't think you're going to be better off in the long run. You're not going to be a better friend, a sibling, a father, later on in life. And so seeing the bigger picture is like the way you're attacking, or the way you should attack your injury, is an analogy or a metaphor for life in general. It's not the end of you. I empathize. I told him, like, I empathize with you. I've gone through twice what you've just, gone through. And I did it back to back, back to back years. And I do not feel bad for you, because you could be exponentially better in every way, from a mental, physical, standpoint. He might not end up being the football player he might have been, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned, like a father, a friend. You know, a football player, a running back title isn't going to be on your gravestone. And I believe you should invest in the titles that will be on your gravestone, whether it be, you know, mother, father, like maybe coach makes it on there, you know, like no one's ever put CEO on a gravestone, you know? And so just investing in being more mission oriented and goal oriented and seeing the bigger picture of things.
Love it. How many other questions I just kind of end with, you've shared some other kind of great tools as well, the journaling, I think doing some of the asking yourself some tough questions, but maybe for other kids that are going through injuries or tough times or, you know, things that you've experienced, what are maybe any other tools that you would recommend they try or check out to maybe help them through their adversity?
I mean, other than like having a support, like I don't know if I could have got through what I got through in a lot of different ways if I didn't have that, you know, support group around me, or having just a few people to go to and be like, man, I'm struggling. But I mean, I read a ton. I think that I read a ton of biographies and like about people who have gone through immense adversity. And I try to look for patterns of what they did to get through that. And, you know, you've gone through so much suffering, just everyone who is listening to this, you've gone through so much, you might as well make it worth it, because the most inspirational, the most, you know, the movers and shakers of the entire world and the history of the world have gone through the most pain. If you look at like the Nelson Mandelas of the world, you know, one of my personal favorite speakers I got a chance to meet was Inky Johnson. And, you know, he went through, and I listened to his same speech before every high school game. I watched Inky Johnson speech, and I watched Earl Campbell highlights. But, you know, you could wield your suffering to help so many people. Like there's no better person to lead people out of the darkness than someone who spent time in it, you know? And, I mean, yeah, I think just learning, and I think understanding people and reading about other inspirational people and how they dealt with things allowed me to better audit myself. And I understood myself better because I'm like, oh, I'm not the only one who's gone through that same feeling. Like looking at a book and be like, oh, I feel that way. You know, that's me right now. Yeah. And so it's like, you're not alone. You know, no one's alone. As alone as you think you are, there are people out there who like care and love for you. You know.
Thank you for tuning in and all the way to the end. Appreciate that. If something this episode caught your ear, is useful or unique, I would love if you would share it, or, you know, a thumbs up is always encouraging as well. If you want to come back and check out more videos, smash that subscribe button, ring that bell for notifications, and we'd love to have you back. Have a great day, and go elevate others.